Okay, so this is the final video dealing with the question of whether there's a separate obligation to eat matzah, and particularly the relationship between that question and the question of korech. So let me just pick up where I left off. I was saying that in the sugya in Psachim Kuf Tedvav Amud Aleph, which is source number 10, that we saw that Rabbi Yochanan says that Hillel's colleagues disagree with him. And then we have a Baraita, which is assumed to show that this is so. The Baraita says, Yachol yehi korchan bevat achat ve'ochlan kederach shehilel ochlan. You might have thought, right, Yachol is a technical term that we find a lot in Midrash Halacha, which introduces a hypothesis that is then going to be rejected. It's followed by the rejection, which is introduced by Talmud Lomar, and that's the case here. So you would have thought that you should follow Hillel's approach and eat everything Pesach, Matzah, Maror together. Talmud Lomar, Torah teaches us otherwise. Al matzot u'marorim yochluhu, and the yochluhu, right, it means that you shall eat it. So afilu ze b'fnei atzmo v'ze b'fnei atzmo, because we have it means you can eat each one by itself. Notice there's something interesting here, that in the previous Braita, where we're told that Hillel would eat the Pesach, Matzah, Maror together, he derived this from the same pasuk and presumably from the same word, namely yochluhu. The derivation would be that since all of them are called it, so it means you eat the Korban Pesach, together with the Matzot Umrorim. But here, the it is being interpreted as meaning that each of these foods is an it. Each food can be eaten individually. So the pasuk is saying, with matzah and maror, you should eat it, each individual item. So I started to say in the last video that this Braita apparently means, or is taken to mean, that according to the Chachamim, you should not eat them together. Right? You would have thought that you should eat them together as Hillel did. The Braita, the pasuk is interpreted to mean you should eat each of them separately, or at least that's what we would expect the Braita to say, except that it has the word afilu, right? If the word afilu were not in the Braita, then we would have read it in the way I just suggested. You might have thought you should eat them all together, but from the fact that the pasuk says yochluhu, you should eat it, meaning you should eat each individually, the Braita would mean you should or you must eat each of them separately, which would mean that if you ate them all together, you would not fulfill your obligation. But now Rav Ashi points out, Mativ la Rav Ashi points out, ihachi my afilu, right? And ihachi is a technical term that means if you are making a certain claim, then there is a problem. So if you are claiming that what the Braita means is that you must eat each item, matzah, maror, and pesach, separately, then the word afilu makes no sense. You should not say you can even eat each one by itself, but rather you should or you must eat each one by itself. Ella amar Rav Ashi, so rather Rav Ashi said, Hai Tana Hachi Katani. This Tana says as follows, and that generally is understood to mean not that the actual wording of the Baraita is emended, but that we understand the Baraita in the following sense, which is, Yachol lo yatsa behu yidei chovato ella imkein korcham bevat achad. You might have thought that you don't fulfill the obligation for Pesach, Matzah, and Maror unless you ate them all together. Ve'ochlan, and eat them as such, kederech shehilel ochlan, as was the practice of Hillel. Talmud lomar, we learn from the pasuk, amatzot u'marorim yochluhu, afilu ze bifnei atzmo, v'ze bifnei atzmo. We learn from the pasuk that you may even eat each by itself. So here the afilu makes sense. In other words, according to this version of the Baraita, those who disagree with Hillel are not saying that you must eat each one separately, but that you may eat each one separately. Meaning, according to Hillel, you must eat them all together, and if you don't, you have not fulfilled your obligation. And according to those who disagree with him, you need not do so, and if you ate each one separately, you still fulfill your obligation. And then, finally, the Talmud says, Hashta, now, based on all the above, de lo itmar hilchata lo kihilel v'lo karabanan, the halacha is not stated in accordance, neither in accordance with Hillel, nor in accordance with the Chachamim. Mivarech al achilat matzah ve'achil. So we recite the bracha al achilat matzah and eat matzah. V'hadar mivarech al achilat maror ve'achil. We subsequently recite the bracha of al achilat maror and eat maror. V'hadar achal matzah v'chasa. And then we eat matzah and chasa, which is the Aramaic translation of chazeret, what we generally understand to be romaine lettuce. Bahade hadadi, together. Below bracha, without a bracha. Zecher lemikdash kihilel, to recall what was done in the time of the temple according to Hillel. So first of all, a note, namely, Yaakov Spiegel, in his doctorate, discusses terms that introduced post-Amoraic passages in the Bavli. Hashta or Hashata is one such term. So here he understands this last statement to be a post-Amoraic statement, and this is a ruling based on what emerges from the sugya above. So what does emerge from the sugya above? We have a baraita in accordance with Hillel. That was the first baraita that appeared. And we have another baraita, which is a rejection of Hillel. And the sugya does not come to a conclusion on this matter. Therefore, the Talmud says we follow both views. But that's not exactly true, and let's see why. When did Hillel eat a korech? He ate a korech in the time of the temple, when one was eating Pesach, matzah, and maror. There is no indication that when the temple is no longer standing, and one is eating only Pesach, that there remains an obligation to eat matzah and maror together. We only know that there is an obligation when there is a korban Pesach. And if you look at the pasuk itself, that actually would seem to be the case, because the pasuk prescribes when you have Pesach, you eat it together with matzah and maror, which Hillel understands to mean all together, bundled together. So if this is so, even Hillel does not require matzah and maror to be eaten together when the temple is not standing. So how do we explain our practice. We eat matzah and maror separate from each other because this is in accordance with the Chachamim, who say that one eats each of them separately. And then we eat matzah and maror together, even though we don't have a Korban Pesach, and that is Zecher Lemikdash Ki Hillel. That is a reminder of, or memorializing of, how the Seder were eaten in the time of the Mikdash according to Hillel. So even though we're not performing the act that Hillel performed and required, namely eating Pesach, Matzah, and Maror together, we still memorialize his practice by eating together those ritual items that we do have, namely the Matzah and the Maror. There are other difficulties in the sugya, and there's actually another girsah. I'm not going to get into that now. The last thing I want to bring to your attention is that there are different versions of what is recited in connection with our consumption of korech. And if you look at source number 12, right? So this is the formula that is found in many Haggadot, Zecher Lemikdash Ki Hillel, right, which is citing the Sugya. Kain asa Hillel bizman shebeit hamikdash haya kayam. Thus did Hillel when the temple was standing. Haya korech Pesach. We'll come back to the fact that that is in parentheses. I forgot what that type of parenthesis is called, but those two arrows. Matzah umaror ve'ochel biyachad, and ate them together. L'kayem mashne'emar, to fulfill what the Torah says, according to his understanding. Al matzot u'marim yochluhu, that Pesach, Matzah, and Maror should be eaten together. Now, there are two variants that are, that if you look at source number 13, so this is from the Shechter Haggadah, so I don't know if this is from Joshua Culp or David Golinkin. I don't remember offhand. I think the commentary is mainly written by Joshua Culp, and he says, the custom of reciting the words in remembrance of the temple, according to Hillel and so on, developed in a much later period. The final section of the above Talmudic passage uses the first three of these words, but they are instructive and not a liturgical recitation. And this is something that happens elsewhere in the Haggadah and in liturgy in general, that words that are instructive become part of the liturgy. We see this later on in the Seder. We say, Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol Shelo Omar Shlosha Dvarim B'Pesach Lo Yatsa Yidei Chovato. Whoever didn't say the following three things does not fulfill one's obligation, Ve'elohein, and they are Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And then we have recitation explaining the symbolic significance of each of these. But up till Pesach, up to the second time that Pesach appears, right? Pesach shayu avotenu ochlim bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam, up to that phrase, is instructive. Rabbi Gamliel is telling us you must say the following. But what we do is include Rabban Gamliel's instruction. Really, all we needed to include was the explanatory statements for Pesach, Matzah, Maror. I'll give you one more example. Early in the Birkot HaShachar section of Shacharit, we say, Le'olam yehei adam yirei shamayim b'seiter or b'seiter v'galui v'dover emet b'lavav v'yashkem v'yomar ribon kol ha'olamim. And so a person should always be a God-fearer privately and publicly, or according to one version, privately, in other words, even privately, and speak truth in his heart, and should rise early and say. So that's an instruction. And then what one should say begins with Ribon Kol Olamim. The whole passage is in the Midrash of Eliyahu, Tana Devei Eliyahu Rabbah. But so we include the instructive sentence. So that's what's happening here too. Okay, so some say you say it, some say you don't say it. There are those who say you shouldn't say it at all because it's a hefsek between the brachot on matzah and maror and the eating of korech. In other words, they say the brachot that we recited previously relate to korech as well, and so there should not be a hefsek by reciting anything between them. But the last thing I want to point out is going back to the word Pesach being in parentheses. On the one hand, logic says include it because this is what Hillel did. He ate Pesach, matzah, and maror. On the other hand, there are those who argue that we should not include Pesach. Why? Because Cain, if it's what we call deiktik, in other words, if it is referring to that which we are actually doing, as we're saying, what we're doing right now, eating matzah and maror together, is a remembrance of Hillel, and he ate, right? And this is what he did. Let me try and say it differently. We're only eating matzah and maror together. So that this that we're doing is commemorating what Hillel did. But we're not actually doing everything that Hillel did. He ate matzah and maror together and Pesach. So if you say Cain asa Hillel, right, that what we're doing right now is what Hillel did, right? What we're saying, according to this explanation, is this is part of what Hillel did, but it's not all of what Hillel did. In other words, he ate matzah and maror together, and we are doing Cain, we are doing thus, to commemorate what Hillel did, but obviously it's only a partial commemoration because he also ate Pesach together with the matzah and the maror. Okay, this is a little, I guess, convoluted, but it is a view, and just want to explain why why some leave out the word Pesach. So one way of reading it is, just to review, and then I'll stop. Zecher Mikdash Hillel. We want to recall what Hillel did. And because Cain asa Hillel did the following in the time of the temple. He would eat Pesach, matzah, and maror together. And we're commemorating it by eating matzah and maror together. If you read Cain as what we're doing right now is what Hillel did, what we mean by that is that this is really part of what Hillel did, because actually he ate all three together, but part of what he did was matzah and maror. So this, what we're doing right now, this eating of matzah and maror together is what Hillel did. He did it together with Korban Pesach, but he did do this. And according to this reading, we should say Haya Korech Matzah and Maror together, and not Pesach. So in sum, what we've seen is that there is a question looking at the biblical texts themselves as to whether we should see the eating of matzah as an obligation apart from Korban Pesach, and that there is Amoraic debate about that question, even though the Bavli assumes that when it comes to Maror, once the temple is destroyed, there is no biblical obligation to eat maror, only a rabbinic one, that is accepted as that's a given in the Bavli. We also saw that according to some midrashim, that's not so clear, and that there seems to be a view that even today there is a biblical obligation to eat maror. And a related question is, because of this issue, a related question is whether physically you should eat all of these items together. In other words, does the pasuk that says that you eat korban pesach al matzot umorim, the basic mitzvah is to eat the korban pesach, but it's to be accompanied by matzah umaror, and that could lead one to say when there is no korban pesach, there is no biblical obligation to eat matzah umaror, and that is one way of understanding what Hillel has in mind. Or even though there is a mitzvah to eat al matzot umorim, that simply means you should eat all of them together, that is, at one time, but then it is easier to say that each of them is a separate obligation, and therefore even when there is no korban pesach, there is still a biblical obligation to eat matzah and maror. And finally, the larger implications here is, and I mentioned this in class, whether in the absence of the korban pesach, the ritual of the first night of Pesach, biblically speaking, in a sense disappears, because without the central item, the central ritual item, the korban pesach, when it is absent, it is impossible for the other items to constitute a sufficient fulfilled mitzvat achila in the first night. That would be true if both matzah and maror were d'Rabbanan, or even in the absence of Pesach, the Torah prescribes that there is a meaningful ritual obligation to eat matzah, or maybe even matzah and maror. And this may reflect a tension and a dispute among the Chachamim as to what degree the destruction of the temple and the absence of the Korban Pesach creates such a significant discontinuity that we can no longer claim to be in any significant way continuing the obligations of the Seder night as they were prescribed in the Torah. Okay, that's it.